So far we have the character stretching the spine up and down in a nice way, but when we stretch the spine, we see that it does stretch, but it doesn't change its volume. And in reality, any object that stretches should lose volume as it stretches out. So we're going to add to this component an attribute, or better, an utility to connect the scale of those joints to modify the scale on the y and z values. We modify the scale on the x to make it longer. Now we want to modify it on the y and the z values. In order to do that, we are going to use a formula that it's nothing too intuitive. It's something that requires previous knowledge of it. So we're going to use something, and I don't want you to be scared about it, but we want to use a simple formula here for recognize what it is. So in order to work with, and this formula works for volume, and I'm not a mathematician, so I really don't like this, but it explains it a little bit better if I show you what it is. So in order to modify the value on y and the value in z, and the scale for both of them, we're going to need to divide the value. The formula is 1 divided by the square root of the scale on y value. So in that way we will modify the volume of it. So let's try to generate that, and the way to do that, let me just hide Photoshop for a moment here. I'm gonna go back to Maya, and we're gonna go back to the node editor, and I'm gonna just go back and look for my multiply divide. I'm going to change the name of this one, and this one I'm going to call it stretch x underscore divide. That way I know that node, this is the node that divides the value for the one we just created for all of them. And now we are going to add another multiply divide to generate that formula. So we're going to take the value that comes out of this guy, and we're going to modify it to modify the value on scale on z and scale on y for those joints. So let me go back and get a multiply divide. I'm going to click on it again. So there is another multiply divide, and this one I'm going to rename it, and I'm going to call it stretch underscore z underscore y underscore, and this one is just going to be a power. So power meaning, of course, is working on the part of this section of the formula. So I'm going to generate the first multiply divide to create this, and to do that we're going to use a power math property to get the value of z. So let me just go back to Maya, and so what we're going to do here is we're going to connect the output from this guy, from the stretch divide. I'm going to connect it into the input of the stretch and power z. So I'm going to just get the output. I'm going to open it up here. The output that we got there was the output in x. So I'm going to try to connect it to this one here. I'm going to connect it to the input in x one more time. So if I click on this guy and I see the attribute for it, you'll see that it's exactly the same attribute, but it's taking right now the output from the stretchy value and it's bringing it into the input, but we're going to modify it. It's not multiplied, it's powered. We're going to power it, and because it's powered, a square root of it, as you remember on our graphics here, there's a square root value. We're going to do it, and right now we're going to say 0.5, and this number will be the same thing for everybody. So you'll have just 0.5 to make that formula there. So the output now, what is happening is that the stretch divide of this guy is powered by 0.5. So and of course that's generating a negative value of that, or a reduced number of that. And now we are going to connect this to to the spine, but we need to add an extra math node to it. So I'm going to go and bring in another multiply divide node here, and this one, the intention with this one is the following one. We're going to go back to my Photoshop. We generated the previous multiply divide, this part of the equation. We now need to bring in this part of the equation into the whole thing, so that we're going to have 1 divided by the square root of scale in z or y. So let me go back to Maya and do it. So this guy is going to be doing that. So this one is going to be a divide. So I'm going to change this one to divide, and I'm actually going to rename it. And the name that I'm going to give to it is maybe stretch underscore z underscore y underscore divide, right? It's different from this divide. This is just stretch and x. This one is this power and stretch and z and y, and this is the divide node. And we are going to connect into this guy. So if you look at the formula has 1 divided by this value. So we're going to put 1 on the top here, because that number is going to be divided by, and then we are going to connect the output of this guy into the input 2. So let me try to get the output, and the output that we're working with is the output in x. So I'm going to try to connect this guy into here, and we're not going to connect it to input 1 because 1 is already there. I'm going to connect to the input 2, input in 2x. So that one. That way we have the 1 dividing by the formula that we had here coming from the previous one. So the output of this node is going to be the one that is going to dictate the scale in z and y for each one of the joints of the spine. So that makes it a lot easier now, because what we're going to do is we're going to grab this guy through the connection editor. We're going to just call my connection editor one more time, and we're going to do exactly the same thing. So this one is loaded on the left, all the joints will be loaded on the right, and now the output of the output in x, because x is being the channel that we've been using, output in x is going to connect to the scale of the joint. X is already connected to the y and z, and I'm going to do the same thing for the other joints, to the scale in y and z. Okay, and as I said, the color, I'm not connecting it yet, just keeping it there. And I'm going to close this, minimize my node editor for now. And now if I'm going to try to stretch this guy out, you see how its scale in y and z changes, because of course we have applied a formula. So it seems a little complicated, but it is really not. Just a few nodes there for us to work with. All right, I'm just going to increment and save this guy, and we're in really good shape for now.